describing the cheerful and surprising stories collected, translated and retold by Ei Theodora Ozaki. Beautiful Legends and Tales of Japan is a valuable collection first published in 1908. The author sets out to introduce these tales, which still remain unknown to the vast majority, to children in the West. The idea for this book came about at the suggestion of the author's friend, Andrew Lang, a renowned collector of fairy tales, who had created his own stories, published in many of the color fairy books. The Beautiful Legends and Tales of Japan offers a magnificent immersion into the world of Japanese culture and folklore, revealing to readers amazing adventures and wise lessons passed down through the generations. This book is a valuable resource for anyone interested in Japanese literature and wants to experience unique stories full of magic and wisdom.
Chapter 14 of Japanese Fairy Tales.
Chapter 15 of Japanese Fairy Tales. Japanese Fairy Tales by Ei Theodora Ozaki. Chapter 15 The Jellyfish and the Monkey. Long, long ago in old Japan, the kingdom of the sea was governed by a wonderful king. He was called Rinjin, or the Dragon King of the Sea. His power was immense, for he was ruler of all sea creatures both great and small, and in his keeping were the jewels of the ebb and flow of the tide. The jewel of the ebbing tide, when thrown into the ocean, caused the sea to recede from the land, and the jewel of the flowing tide made the waves to rise mountains high and to flow in upon the shore like a tidal wave. The palace of Rinjin was at the bottom of the sea, and was so beautiful that no one has ever seen anything like it, even in dreams. The walls were of coral, the roof of jadestone and chrysoprase, and the floors were of the finest mother of pearl. But the Dragon King, in spite of his wide-spreading kingdom, his beautiful palace, and all its wonders, and his power which none disputed throughout the whole sea, was not at all happy, for he reigned alone. At last he thought that if he married, he would not only be happier, but also more powerful. So he decided to take a wife. Calling all his fish retainers together, he chose several of them as ambassadors to go through the sea and seek for a young dragon princess who would be his bride. At last they returned to the palace, bringing with them a lovely young dragon. Her scales were of glittering green like the wings of summer beetles. Her eyes threw out glances of fire, and she was dressed in gorgeous robes. All the jewels of the sea, worked in with embroidery, adorned them. The king fell in love with her at once, and the wedding ceremony was celebrated with great splendor. Every living thing in the sea, from the great whales down to the little shrimps, came in shoals to offer their congratulations to the bride and bridegroom, and to wish them a long and prosperous life. Never had there been such an assemblage or such gay festivities in the fish world before. The train of bearers who carried the bride's possessions to her new home seemed to reach across the waves from one end of the sea to the other. Each fish carried a phosphorescent lantern and was dressed in ceremonial robes, gleaming blue and pink and silver. And the waves, as they rose and fell and broke that night, seemed to be rolling masses of white and green fire, for the phosphorus shone with double brilliancy in honor of the event. Now for a time the Dragon King and his bride lived very happily. They loved each other dearly, and the bridegroom day after day took delight in showing his bride all the wonders and treasures of his coral palace. And she was never tired of wandering with him through its vast halls and gardens. Life seemed to them both like a long summer's day. 2 months passed in this happy way, and then the Dragon Queen fell ill and was obliged to stay in bed. The king was sorely troubled when he saw his precious bride so ill, and at once sent for the fish doctor to come and give her some medicine. He gave special orders to the servants to nurse her carefully and to wait upon her with diligence. But in spite of all the nurse's assiduous care and the medicine that the doctor prescribed, the young queen showed no signs of recovery, but grew daily worse. Then the Dragon King interviewed the doctor and blamed him for not curing the queen. The doctor was alarmed at Rinjin's evident displeasure, and excused his want of skill by saying that although he knew the right kind of medicine to give the invalid, it was impossible to find it in the sea.
"Do you mean to tell me that you can't get the medicine here?"
asked the Dragon King.
"It is just as you say," said the doctor.
"Tell me what it is you want for the queen," demanded Rinjin.
"I want the liver of a live monkey," answered the doctor.
"The liver of a live monkey," Of course, that will be most difficult to get, said the king.
If we could only get that for the Queen, Her Majesty would soon recover, said the doctor.
Very well, that decides it. We must get it somehow or other. But where are we most likely to find a monkey? Asked the king.
Then the doctor told the Dragon King that some distance to the south there was a monkey island where a great many monkeys lived.
If only you could capture one of these monkeys, said the doctor.
How can any of my people capture a monkey? Said the Dragon King, greatly puzzled. The monkeys live on dry land, while we live in the water, and out of our element we are quite powerless. I don't see what we can do.
That has been my difficulty too, said the doctor. But amongst your innumerable servants, you surely can find one who can go on shore for that express purpose.
Something must be done,
said the king, and calling his chief steward, he consulted him on the matter. The chief stewards thought for some time, and then, as if struck by a sudden thought, said joyfully,
I know what we must do. There is the kurage, jellyfish. He is certainly ugly to look at, but he is proud of being able to walk on land with his 4 legs like a tortoise. Let us send him to the island of monkeys to catch one.
The jellyfish was then summoned to the king's presence, and was told by his majesty what was required of him. The jellyfish, on being told of the unexpected mission which was to be entrusted to him, looked very troubled, and said that he had never been to the island in question, and as he had never had any experience in catching monkeys, he was afraid that he would not be able to get one.
Well, said the chief steward, if you depend on your strength or dexterity, you will never catch a monkey. The only way is to play a trick on one. How can I play a trick on a monkey? I don't know how to do it, said the perplexed jellyfish. This is what you must do, said the wily chief steward. When you approach the island of monkeys and meet some of them, you must try to get very friendly with one. Tell him that you are a servant of the Dragon King, and invite him to come and visit you and see the Dragon King's palace. Try and describe it to him as vividly as you can, the grandeur of the palace and the wonders of the sea, so as to arouse his curiosity and make him long to see it all. But how am I to get the monkey here? You know monkeys don't swim, said the reluctant jellyfish. You must carry him on your back. What is the use of your shell if you can't do that? Said the chief steward. Won't he be very heavy? Queried Kurage again. You mustn't mind that, for you are working for the Dragon King, replied the chief steward. I will do my best then, said the jellyfish, and he swam away from the palace and started off towards the monkey island. Swimming swiftly, he reached his destination in a few hours, and landed by a convenient wave upon the shore. On looking round, he saw not far away a big pine tree with drooping branches, and on one of those branches was just what he was looking for, a live monkey. I'm in luck, thought the jellyfish. Now I must flatter the creature and try to entice him to come back with me to the palace, and my part will be done. So the jellyfish slowly walked towards the pine tree. In those ancient days the jellyfish had 4 legs and a hard shell like a tortoise. When he got to the pine tree, he raised his voice and said, How do you do, Mr. Monkey? Isn't it a lovely day? A very fine day, answered the monkey from the tree. I have never seen you in this part of the world before. Where have you come from, and what is your name? My name is Kurage, or Jellyfish. I am one of the servants of the Dragon King. I have heard so much of your beautiful island that I have come on purpose to see it, answered the jellyfish. I am very glad to see you, said the monkey. By the by, said the jellyfish, have you ever seen the palace of the Dragon King of the Sea where I live? "I have often heard of it, but I have never seen it," answered the monkey. "Then you ought most surely to come. It is a great pity for you to go through life without seeing it. The beauty of the palace is beyond all description. It is certainly, to my mind, the most lovely place in the world," said the jellyfish. "Is it so beautiful as all that?" asked the monkey in astonishment. Then the jellyfish saw his chance, and went on describing to the best of his ability the beauty and grandeur of the Sea King's palace, and the wonders of the garden with its curious trees of white, pink, and red coral, and the still more curious fruits like great jewels hanging on the branches. The monkey grew more and more interested, and as he listened he came down the tree step by step, so as not to lose a word of the wonderful story. "I have got him at last," thought the jellyfish, but aloud he said, "Mr. Monkey, I must now go back. As you have never seen the palace of the Dragon King, won't you avail yourself of this splendid opportunity by coming with me? I shall then be able to act as guide and show you all the sights of the sea, which will be even more wonderful to you, a landlubber." "I should love to go," said the monkey, "but how am I to cross the water? I can't swim, as you surely know." "There is no difficulty about that. I can carry you on my back." "That will be troubling you too much," said the monkey. "I can do it quite easily. I am stronger than I look, so you needn't hesitate," said the jellyfish, and taking the monkey on his back, he stepped into the sea. "Keep very still, Mr. Monkey," said the jellyfish. "You mustn't fall into the sea. I am responsible for your safe arrival at the king's palace." "Please don't go so fast, or I am sure I shall fall off," said the monkey. Thus they went along, the jellyfish skimming through the waves with the monkey sitting on his back. When they were about halfway, the jellyfish, who knew very little of anatomy, began to wonder if the monkey had his liver with him or not. "Mr. Monkey, tell me, have you such a thing as a liver with you?" The monkey was very much surprised at this queer question, and asked what the jellyfish wanted with a liver. "That is the most important thing of all," said the stupid jellyfish, "so as soon as I recollected it, I asked you if you had yours with you." "Why is my liver so important to you?" asked the monkey. "Oh, you will learn the reason later," said the jellyfish. The monkey grew more and more curious and suspicious, and urged the jellyfish to tell him for what his liver was wanted, and ended up by appealing to his hearer's feelings by saying that he was very troubled at what he had been told. Then the jellyfish, seeing how anxious the monkey looked, was sorry for him and told him everything, how the Dragon Queen had fallen ill, and how the doctor had said that only the liver of a live monkey would cure her, and how the Dragon King had sent him to find one. "Now I have done as I was told, and as soon as we arrive at the palace, the doctor will want your liver, so I feel sorry for you," said the silly jellyfish. The poor monkey was horrified when he learnt all this, and very angry at the trick played upon him. He trembled with fear at the thought of what was in store for him. But the monkey was a clever animal, and he thought it the wisest plan not to show any sign of the fear he felt, so he tried to calm himself, and to think of some way by which he might escape. "The doctor means to cut me open, then take my liver out. Why, I shall die," thought the monkey. At last a bright thought struck him, so he said quite cheerfully to the jellyfish, "What a pity it was, Mr. Jellyfish, that you did not speak of this before we left the island." "If I had told why I wanted you to accompany me, you would certainly have refused to come," answered the jellyfish. "You are quite mistaken," said the monkey. "Monkeys can very well spare a liver or two, especially when it is wanted for the Dragon Queen of the Sea. If I had only guessed of what you were in need, I should have presented you with one without waiting to be asked. I have several livers, but the greatest pity is that as you did not speak in time, I have left all my livers hanging on the pine tree." "Have you left your liver behind you?" asked the jellyfish. Yes, said the cunning monkey. During the daytime I usually leave my liver hanging up on the branch of a tree, as it is very much in the way when I am climbing about from tree to tree. Today, listening to your interesting conversation, I quite forgot it, and left it behind when I came off with you. If only you had spoken in time, I should have remembered it, and should have brought it along with me. The jellyfish was very disappointed when he heard this, for he believed every word the monkey said. The monkey was of no good without a liver. Finally, the jellyfish stopped and told the monkey so. Well, said the monkey, that is soon remedied. I am really sorry to think of all your trouble, but if you will only take me back to the place where you found me, I shall soon be able to get my liver. The jellyfish did not at all like the idea of going all the way back to the island again, but the monkey assured him that if he would be so kind as to take him back, he would get his very best liver and bring it with him the next time. Thus persuaded, the jellyfish turned his course towards the monkey island once more. No sooner had the jellyfish reached the shore than the sly monkey landed, and getting up into the nearest pine tree where the jellyfish had first seen him, he cut several capers amongst the branches, with joy at being safe home again, and then looking down at the jellyfish said, So many thanks for all the trouble you have taken. Please present my compliments to the Dragon King on your return. The jellyfish wondered at this speech, and the mocking tone in which it was uttered. Then he asked the monkey if it wasn't his intention to come with him at once after getting his liver. The monkey replied laughingly that he couldn't afford to lose his liver. It was too precious. But remember your promise, pleaded the jellyfish, now very discouraged. That promise was false, and anyhow it is now broken, answered the monkey. Then he began to jeer at the jellyfish, and told him that he had been deceiving him the whole time, that he had no wish to lose his life, which he certainly would have done had he gone on to the Sea King's palace to the old doctor waiting for him, instead of persuading the jellyfish to return under false pretenses. Of course I won't give you my liver, but come and get it if you can, added the monkey mockingly from the tree. There was nothing for the jellyfish to do now but to repent of his stupidity, and to return to the Dragon King of the Sea, and to confess his failure. So he started sadly and slowly to swim back. The last thing he heard as he glided away, leaving the island behind him, was the monkey laughing at him. Meanwhile, the Dragon King, the doctor, the chief steward, and all the servants were waiting impatiently for the return of the jellyfish. When they caught sight of him approaching the palace, they hailed him with delight. They began to thank him profusely for all the trouble he had taken in going to the monkey island, and then they asked him where the monkey was. Now the day of reckoning had come for the jellyfish. He quaked all over as he told his story, how he had brought the monkey halfway over the sea, and then had stupidly let out the secret of his commission, how the monkey had deceived him by making him believe that he had left his liver behind him. The Dragon King's wrath was great, and he at once gave orders that the jellyfish was to be severely punished. The punishment was a horrible one. All the bones were to be drawn out from his living body, and he was to be beaten with sticks. The poor jellyfish, humiliated and horrified beyond all words, cried out for pardon, but the Dragon King's order had to be obeyed. The servants of the palace forthwith each brought out a stick and surrounded the jellyfish, and after pulling out his bones they beat him to a flat pulp, and then took him out beyond the palace gates and threw him into the water. Here he was left to suffer and repent his foolish chattering, and to grow accustomed to his new state of bonelessness. From this story it is evident that in former times the jellyfish once had a shell and bones something like a tortoise, but ever since the Dragon King's sentence was carried out on the ancestor of the jellyfishes, his descendants have all been soft and boneless, just as you see them today thrown up by the waves high upon the shores of Japan. End of Chapter 15. The Jellyfish and the Monkey. Chapter 16 of Japanese Fairy Tales.
Japanese Fairy Tales by Ei Theodora Ozaki. Chapter 16. The Quarrel of the Monkey and the Crab. Long, long ago, one bright autumn day in Japan, it happened that a pink-faced monkey and a yellow crab were playing together along the bank of a river. As they were running about, the crab found a rice dumpling, and the monkey a persimmon seed. The crab picked up the rice dumpling and showed it to the monkey, saying, "Look what a nice thing I have found." Then the monkey held up his persimmon seed and said, "I also have found something good. Look!" Now, though the monkey is always very fond of persimmon fruit, he had no use for the seed he had just found. The persimmon seed is as hard and uneatable as a stone. He, therefore, in his greedy nature, felt very envious of the crab's nice dumpling, and he proposed an exchange. The crab naturally did not see why he should give up his prize for a hard stone-like seed, and would not consent to the monkey's proposition. Then the cunning monkey began to persuade the crab, saying, "How unwise you are not to think of the future! Your rice dumpling can be eaten now, and is certainly much bigger than my seed. But if you sow this seed in the ground, it will soon grow and become a great tree in a few years, and bear an abundance of fine ripe persimmons year after year. If only I could show it to you then, with the yellow fruit hanging on its branches. Of course, if you don't believe me, I shall sow it myself, though I am sure later on you will be very sorry that you did not take my advice." The simple-minded crab could not resist the monkey's clever persuasion. He at last gave in and consented to the monkey's proposal, and the exchange was made. The greedy monkey soon gobbled up the dumpling, and with great reluctance gave up the persimmon seed to the crab. He would have liked to keep that too, but he was afraid of making the crab angry and of being pinched by his sharp scissor-like claws. They then separated, the monkey going home to his forest trees, and the crab to his stones along the riverside. As soon as the crab reached home, he put the persimmon seed in the ground as the monkey had told him. In the following spring, the crab was delighted to see the shoot of a young tree push its way up through the ground. Each year it grew bigger, till at last it blossomed one spring, and in the following autumn bore some fine large persimmons. Among the broad, smooth green leaves, the fruit hung like golden balls, and as they ripened, they mellowed to a deep orange. It was the little crab's pleasure to go out day by day and sit in the sun, and put out his long eyes in the same way as a snail puts out its horn, and watch the persimmons ripening to perfection. "How delicious they will be to eat!" he said to himself. At last, one day he knew the persimmons must be quite ripe, and he wanted very much to taste one. He made several attempts to climb the tree, in the vain hope of reaching one of the beautiful persimmons hanging above him, but he failed each time, for a crab's legs are not made for climbing trees, but only for running along the ground and over stones, both of which he can do most cleverly. In his dilemma, he thought of his old playmate the monkey, who, he knew, could climb trees better than anyone else in the world. He determined to ask the monkey to help him, and set out to find him. Running crab fashion up the stony riverbank, over the pathways into the shadowy forest, the crab at last found the monkey taking an afternoon nap in his favorite pine tree, with his tail curled tight around a branch to prevent him from falling off in his dreams. He was soon wide awake, however, when he heard himself called, and eagerly listening to what the crab told him. When he heard that the seed which he had long ago exchanged for a rice dumpling had grown into a tree, and was now bearing good fruit, he was delighted, for he at once devised a cunning plan which would give him all the persimmons for himself. He consented to go with the crab to pick the fruit for him, When they both reached the spot, the monkey was astonished to see what a fine tree had sprung from the seed, and with what a number of ripe persimmons the branches were loaded. He quickly climbed the tree and began to pluck and eat as fast as he could, one persimmon after another. Each time he chose the best and ripest he could find, and went on eating till he could eat no more. Not one would he give to the poor hungry crab waiting below, and when he had finished, there was little but the hard, unripe fruit left. You can imagine the feelings of the poor crab after waiting patiently, for so long as he had done, for the tree to grow and the fruit to ripen, when he saw the monkey devouring all the good persimmons. He was so disappointed that he ran round and round the tree, calling to the monkey to remember his promise. The monkey at first took no notice of the crab's complaints, but at last he picked out the hardest, greenest persimmon he could find, and aimed it at the crab's head. The persimmon is as hard as stone when it is unripe. The monkey's missile struck home, and the crab was sorely hurt by the blow. Again and again, as fast as he could pick them, the monkey pulled off the hard persimmons and threw them at the defenseless crab till he dropped dead, covered with wounds all over his body. There he lay a pitiful sight at the foot of the tree he had himself planted. When the wicked monkey saw that he had killed the crab, he ran away from the spot as fast as he could, in fear and trembling, like a coward as he was. Now the crab had a son who had been playing with a friend not far from the spot where this sad work had taken place. On the way home he came across his father dead, in a most dreadful condition. His head was smashed and his shell broken in several places, and around his body lay the unripe persimmons which had done their deadly work. At this dreadful sight the poor young crab sat down and wept. But when he had wept for some time, he told himself that this crying would do no good. It was his duty to avenge his father's murder, and this he determined to do. He looked about for some clue which would lead him to discover the murderer. Looking up at the tree, he noticed that the best fruit had gone, and that all around lay bits of peel and numerous seeds strewn on the ground, as well as the unripe persimmons, which had evidently been thrown at his father. Then he understood that the monkey was the murderer, for he now remembered that his father had once told him the story of the rice dumpling and the persimmon seed. The young crab knew that monkeys liked persimmons above all other fruit, and he felt sure that his greed for the coveted fruit had been the cause of the old crab's death. Alas! He at first thought of going to attack the monkey at once, for he burned with rage. Second thoughts, however, told him that this was useless, for the monkey was an old and cunning animal, and would be hard to overcome. He must meet cunning with cunning, and ask some of his friends to help him, for he knew it would be quite out of his power to kill him alone. The young crab set out at once to call on the mortar, his father's old friend, and told him of all that had happened. He besought the mortar with tears to help him avenge his father's death. The mortar was very sorry when he heard the woeful tale, and promised at once to help the young crab punish the monkey to death. He warned him that he must be very careful in what he did, for the monkey was a strong and cunning enemy. The mortar now sent to fetch the bee and the chestnut, also the crab's old friends, to consult them about the matter. In a short time the bee and the chestnut arrived. When they were told all the details of the old crab's death and of the monkey's wickedness and greed, they both gladly consented to help the young crab in his revenge. After talking for a long time as to the ways and means of carrying out their plans, they separated, and Mr. Mortar went home with the young crab to help him bury his poor father. While all this was taking place, the monkey was congratulating himself, as the wicked often do before their punishment comes upon them, on all that he had done so neatly. He thought it quite a fine thing that he had robbed his friend of all his ripe persimmons, and then that he had killed him. Still, Smile as hard as he might, he could not banish altogether the fear of the consequence should his evil deeds be discovered. If he were found out, and he told himself that this could not be, for he had escaped unseen, the crab's family would be sure to bear him hatred and seek to take revenge on him. So he would not go out, and kept himself at home for several days. He found this kind of life, however, extremely dull, accustomed as he was to the free life of the woods, and at last he said, "No one knows that it was I who killed the crab. I am sure that the old thing breathed his last before I left him. Dead crabs have no mouths. Who is there to tell that I am the murderer? Since no one knows, what is the use of shutting myself up and brooding over the matter? What is done cannot be undone." With this, he wandered out into the crab's settlement, and crept about as slyly as possible near the crab's house, and tried to hear the neighbors' gossip round about. He wanted to find out what the crabs were saying about their chief's death, for the old crab had been the chief of the tribe. But he heard nothing, and said to himself, "They are all such fools that they don't know and don't care who murdered their chief." Little did he know, in his so-called monkey's wisdom, that this seeming unconcern was part of the young crab's plan. He purposely pretended not to know who had killed his father, and also to believe that he had met his death through his own fault. By this means he could the better keep the secret revenge on the monkey, which he was meditating. So the monkey returned home from his walk quite content. He told himself he had nothing now to fear. One fine day, when the monkey was sitting at home, he was surprised by the appearance of a messenger from the young crab. While he was wondering what this might mean, the messenger bowed before him and said, "I have been sent by my master to inform you that his father died the other day in falling from a persimmon tree while trying to climb the tree after fruit. This, being the 7th day, is the first anniversary after his death, and my master has prepared a little festival in his father's honor, and bids you come to participate in it, as you are one of his best friends. My master hopes you will honor his house with your kind visit." When the monkey heard these words, he rejoiced in his inmost heart, for all his fears of being suspected were now at rest. He could not guess that a plot had just been set in motion against him. He pretended to be very surprised at the news of the crab's death, and said, "I am indeed very sorry to hear of your chief's death. We were great friends, as you know. I remember that we once exchanged a rice dumpling for a persimmon seed. It grieves me much to think that seed was in the end the cause of his death. I accept your kind invitation with many thanks. I shall be delighted to do honor to my poor old friend." And he screwed some false tears from his eyes. The messenger laughed inwardly and thought, "The wicked monkey is now dropping false tears, but within a short time he shall shed real ones." But aloud he thanked the monkey politely and went home. When he had gone, the monkey laughed aloud at what he thought was the young crab's innocence, and without the least feeling began to look forward to the feast to be held that day in honor of the dead crab, to which he had been invited. He changed his dress and set out solemnly to visit the young crab. He found all the members of the crab's family and his relatives waiting to receive him and welcome him. As soon as the bows of meeting were over, they led him to a hall. Here the young chief mourner came to receive him. Expressions of condolence and thanks were exchanged between them, and then they all sat down to a luxurious feast and entertained the monkey as the guest of honor. The feast over, he was next invited to the tea ceremony room to drink a cup of tea. When the young crab had conducted the monkey to the tea room, he left him and retired. Time passed, and still he did not return. At last the monkey became impatient. He said to himself,
This tea ceremony is always a very slow affair. I am tired of waiting so long. I am very thirsty after drinking so much sake at the dinner." He then approached the charcoal fireplace and began to pour out some hot water from the kettle boiling there, when something burst out from the ashes with a great pop and hit the monkey right in the neck. It was the chestnut, one of the crab's friends, who had hidden himself in the fireplace. The monkey, taken by surprise, jumped backward and then started to run out of the room. The bee, who was hiding outside the screens, now flew out and stung him on the cheek. The monkey was in great pain. His neck was burned by the chestnut, and his face badly stung by the bee, but he ran on screaming and chattering with rage. Now the stone mortar had hidden himself with several other stones on the top of the crab's gate, and as the monkey ran underneath, the mortar and all fell down on top of the monkey's head. Was it possible for the monkey to bear the weight of the mortar falling on him from the top of the gate? He lay crushed and in great pain, quite unable to get up. As he lay there helpless, the young crab came up, and, holding his great claw scissors over the monkey, he said, "Do you now remember that you murdered my father?" "Then you are my enemy?" gasped the monkey brokenly. "Of course," said the young crab. "It was your father's fault, not mine," gasped the unrepentant monkey. "Can you still lie? I will soon put an end to your breath." And with that, he cut off the monkey's head with his pincer claws. Thus the wicked monkey met his well-merited punishment, and the young crab avenged his father's death. This is the end of the story of the monkey, the crab, and the persimmon seed. End of chapter 16. The Quarrel of the Monkey and the Crab. Chapter 17 of Japanese Fairy Tales. Japanese Fairy Tales by Ei Theodora Ozaki. Chapter 17. The White Hare and the Crocodiles. Long, long ago, when all the animals could talk, there lived in the province of Inaba in Japan a little white hare. His home was on the island of Oki, just across the sea from the mainland of Inaba. Now the hare wanted very much to cross over to Inaba. Day after day he would go out and sit on the shore and look longingly over the water in the direction of Inaba. And day after day he hoped to find some way of getting across. One day, as usual, the hare was standing on the beach, looking towards the mainland across the water, when he saw a great crocodile swimming near the island. "This is very lucky," thought the hare. "Now I shall be able to get my wish. I will ask the crocodile to carry me across the sea." But he was doubtful whether the crocodile would consent to do what he wanted. So he thought, instead of asking a favor, he would try to get what he wanted by a trick. So with a loud voice he called to the crocodile and said, "Oh, Mr. Crocodile, isn't it a lovely day?" The crocodile, who had come out all by itself that day to enjoy the bright sunshine, was just beginning to feel a bit lonely when the hare's cheerful greeting broke the silence. The crocodile swam nearer the shore, very pleased to hear someone speak. "I wonder who it was that spoke to me just now. Was it you, Mr. Hare? You must be very lonely all by yourself." "Oh no, I am not at all lonely," said the hare. "But as it was such a fine day, I came out here to enjoy myself. Won't you stop and play with me a little while?" The crocodile came out of the sea and sat on the shore, and the two played together for some time. Then the hare said, "Mr. Crocodile, you live in the sea and I live on this island, and we do not often meet,
so I know very little about you. Tell me, do you think the number of your company is greater than mine?" "Of course, there are more crocodiles than hares," answered the crocodile. "Can you not see that for yourself? You live on this small island while I live in the sea, which spreads through all parts of the world. So if I call together all the crocodiles who dwell in the sea, you hares will be as nothing compared to us." The crocodile was very conceited. The hare, who meant to play a trick on the crocodile, said, "Do you think it possible for you to call up enough crocodiles to form a line from this island across the sea to Inaba?" The crocodile thought for a moment, then answered, "Of course it is possible." "Then do try," said the artful hare, "and I will count the number from here." The crocodile, who was very simple-minded, and who hadn't the least idea that the hare intended to play a trick on him, agreed to do what the hare asked, and said, "Wait a little while I go back into the sea and call my company together." The crocodile plunged into the sea and was gone for some time. The hare, meanwhile, waited patiently on the shore. At last the crocodile appeared, bringing with him a large number of other crocodiles. "Look, Mr. Hare," said the crocodile, "it is nothing for my friends to form a line between here and Inaba. There are enough crocodiles to stretch from here even as far as China or India. Did you ever see so many crocodiles?" Then the whole company of crocodiles arranged themselves in the water so as to form a bridge between the island of Oki and the mainland of Inaba. When the hare saw the bridge of crocodiles, he said, "How splendid! I did not believe this was possible. Now let me count you all. To do this, however, with your permission, I must walk over on your backs to the other side, so please be so good as not to move, or else I shall fall into the sea and be drowned." So the hare hopped off the island onto the strange bridge of crocodiles, counting as he jumped from one crocodile's back to the other. "Please keep quite still, or I shall not be able to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Thus the cunning hare walked right across to the mainland of Inaba. Not content with getting his wish, he began to jeer at the crocodiles instead of thanking them, and said as he leapt off the last one's back, "Oh, you stupid crocodiles! Now I have done with you!" And he was just about to run away as fast as he could, but he did not escape so easily. For so soon as the crocodiles understood that this was a trick played upon them by the hare so as to enable him to cross the sea, and that the hare was now laughing at them for their stupidity, they became furiously angry and made up their minds to take revenge. So some of them ran after the hare and caught him. Then they all surrounded the poop little animal and pulled out all his fur. He cried out loudly and entreated them to spare him, but with each tuft of fur they pulled out, they said, "Serve you right." When the crocodiles had pulled out the last bit of fur, they threw the poor hare on the beach, and all swam away laughing at what they had done. The hare was now in a pitiful plight. All his beautiful white fur had been pulled out, and his bare little body was quivering with pain and bleeding all over. He could hardly move, and all he could do was to lie on the beach quite helpless and weep over the misfortune that had befallen him. Notwithstanding that it was his own fault that had brought all this misery and suffering upon the white hare of Inaba, anyone seeing the poor little creature could not help feeling sorry for him in his sad condition, for the crocodiles had been very cruel in their revenge. Just at this time, a number of men, who looked like kings' sons, happened to pass by, and seeing the hare lying on the beach, crying, stopped and asked what was the matter. The hare lifted up his head, from between his paws and answered them, saying, "I had a fight with some crocodiles, but I was beaten, and they pulled out all my fur and left me to suffer here. That is why I am crying." Now one of these young men had a bad and spiteful disposition, but he feigned kindness and said to the hare, "I feel very sorry for you. If you will only try it, I know of a remedy which will cure your sore body. Go and bathe yourself in the sea, and then come and sit in the wind. This will make your fur grow again, and you will be just as you were before." Then all the young men passed on. The hare was very pleased, thinking he had found a cure. He went and bathed in the sea, and then came out and sat where the wind could blow upon him. But as the wind blew and dried him, his skin became drawn and hardened, and the salt increased the pain so much that he rolled on the sand in his agony and cried aloud. Just then another king's son passed by, carrying a great bag on his back. He saw the hare and stopped and asked why he was crying so loudly. But the poor hare, remembering that he had been deceived by one very like the man who now spoke to him, did not answer but continued to cry. But this man had a kind heart, and looked at the hare very pityingly and said, "You poor thing, I see that your fur is all pulled out, and that your skin is quite bare. Who can have treated you so cruelly?" When the hare heard these kind words, he felt very grateful to the man, and encouraged by his gentle manner, the hare told him all that had befallen him. The little animal hid nothing from his friend, but told him frankly how he had played a trick on the crocodiles, and how he had come across the bridge they had made, thinking that he wished to count their number, how he had jeered at them for their stupidity, and then how the crocodiles had revenged themselves on him. Then he went on to say how he had been deceived by a party of men who looked very like his kind friend, and the hare ended his long tale of woe by begging the man to give him some medicine that would cure him and make his fur grow again. When the hare had finished his story, the man was full of pity towards him and said, "I am very sorry for all you have suffered, but remember, it was only the consequence of the deceit you practiced on the crocodiles." "I know," answered the sorrowful hare, "but I have repented and made up my mind never to use deceit again, so I beg you to show me how I may cure my sore body and make the fur grow again." "Then I will tell you of a good remedy," said the man. "First go and bathe well in that pond over there and try to wash all the salt from your body. Then pick some of those kaba flowers that are growing near the edge of the water, spread them on the ground, and roll yourself on them. If you do this, the pollen will cause your fur to grow again, and you will be quite well in a little while." The hare was very glad to be told what to do, so kindly. He crawled to the pond pointed out to him, bathed well in it, and then picked the kaba flowers growing near the water and rolled himself on them. To his amazement, even while he was doing this, he saw his nice white fur growing again. The pain ceased, and he felt just as he had done before all his misfortunes. The hare was overjoyed at his quick recovery, and went hopping joyfully towards the young man who had so helped him, and kneeling down at his feet said, "I cannot express my thanks for all you have done for me. It is my earnest wish to do something for you in return. Please tell me who you are." "I am no king's son as you think me. I am a fairy, and my name is Okuni Nushi no Mikoto," answered the man, "and those beings who passed here before me are my brothers. They have heard of a beautiful princess called Yakami who lives in this province of Inaba, and they are on their way to find her and ask her to marry one of them. But on this expedition I am only an attendant, so I am walking behind them with this great big bag on my back." The hare humbled himself before this great fairy Okuni Nushi no Mikoto, whom many in that part of the land worshipped as a god. "Oh, I did not know you were Okuni Nushi no Mikoto. How kind you have been to me! It is impossible to believe that unkind fellow who sent me to bathe in the sea is one of your brothers. I am quite sure that the princess, whom your brothers have gone to seek, will refuse to be the bride of any of them, and will prefer you for your goodness of heart. I am quite sure that you will win her heart without intending to do so, and she will ask to be your bride." Okuni Nushi no Mikoto took no notice of what the hare said, but bidding the little animal goodbye, he went on his way quickly and soon overtook his brothers. He found them just entering the princess's gate. Just as the hare had said, the princess could not be persuaded to become the bride of any of the brothers, but when she looked at the kind brother's face, she went straight up to him and said, "To you I give myself." And so they were married. This is the end of the story. Okuni Nushi no Mikoto is worshipped by the people in some parts of Japan as a god, and the hare has become famous as the white hare of Inaba. But what became of the crocodiles, nobody knows. End of chapter 17. The White Hare and the Crocodiles. Chapter 18 of Japanese Fairy Tales. Japanese Fairy Tales by Ei Theodora Ozaki. Chapter 18. The Story of Prince Yamato Take. The insignia of the great Japanese Empire is composed of 3 treasures which have been considered sacred and guarded with jealous care from time immemorial. These are the Yatano no Kagami, or the Mirror of Yata, the Yasakami no Magatama, or the Jewel of Yasakami, and the Murakumo no Tsurugi, or the Sword of Murakumo. Of these 3 treasures of the empire, the Sword of Murakumo, afterwards known as Kusanagi no Tsurugi, or the grass-cleaving sword, is considered the most precious and most highly to be honored, for it is the symbol of strength to this nation of warriors, and the talisman of invincibility for the emperor, while he holds it sacred in the shrine of his ancestors. Nearly 2,000 years ago, this sword was kept at the shrines of Ite, the temples dedicated to the worship of Amaterasu, the great and beautiful sun goddess from whom the Japanese emperors are said to be descended. There is a story of knightly adventure and daring which explains why the name of the sword was changed from that of Murakumo to Kasanagi, which means grass clearing. Once, many years ago, there was born a son to the Emperor Keiko, the 12th in descent from the great Jimmu, the founder of the Japanese dynasty. This prince was the second son of the Emperor Keiko, and he was named Yamato. From his childhood he proved himself to be of remarkable strength, wisdom, and courage, and his father noticed with pride that he gave promise of great things, and he loved him even more than he did his elder son. Now when Prince Yamato had grown to manhood, in the olden days of Japanese history, a boy was considered to have reached man's estate at the early age of 16. The realm was much troubled by a band of outlaws, whose chiefs were 2 brothers, Kumaso and Takeru. These rebels seemed to delight in rebelling against the king, in breaking the laws and defying all authority. At last, King Keiko ordered his younger son, Prince Yamato, to subdue the brigands and, if possible, to rid the land of their evil lives. Prince Yamato was only 16 years of age. He had but reached his manhood according to the law, yet though he was such a youth in years, he possessed the dauntless spirit of a warrior of fuller age, and knew not what fear was. Even then, there was no man who could rival him for courage and bold deeds, and he received his father's command with great joy. He at once made ready to start, and great was the stir in the precincts of the palace as he and his trusty followers gathered together
and prepared for the expedition, and polished up their armor and donned it. Before he left his father's court, he went to pray at the shrine of Ise, and to take leave of his aunt, the Princess Yamato, for his heart was somewhat heavy at the thought of the dangers he had to face, and he felt that he needed the protection of his ancestress, Amaterasu, the sun goddess. The princess, his aunt, came out to give him glad welcome, and congratulated him on being trusted with so great a mission by his father the king. She then gave him one of her gorgeous robes as a keepsake to go with him and to bring him good luck, saying that it would surely be of service to him on this adventure. She then wished him all success in his undertaking and bade him good speed. The young prince bowed low before his aunt and received her gracious gift with much pleasure and many respectful bows. "I will now set out," said the prince, and returning to the palace, he put himself at the head of his troops. Thus cheered by his aunt's blessing, he felt ready for all that might befall, and marching through the land, he went down to the southern island of Kyushu, the home of the brigands. Before many days had passed, he reached the southern island, and then slowly but surely made his way to the headquarters of the chiefs Kumaso and Takeru. He now met with great difficulties, for he found the country exceedingly wild and rough. The mountains were high and steep, the valleys dark and deep, and huge trees and boulders of rock blocked up the road and stopped the progress of his army. It was all but impossible to go on. Though the prince was but a youth, he had the wisdom of years, and seeing that it was vain to try and lead his men further, he said to himself, "To attempt to fight a battle in this impassable country unknown to my men only makes my task harder. We cannot clear the roads and fight as well. It is wiser for me to resort to stratagem and come upon my enemies unawares. In that way I may be able to kill them without much exertion." So he now bade his army halt by the way. His wife, the Princess Ototachibana, had accompanied him, and he bade her bring him the robe his aunt, the priestess of Ise, had given him, and to help him attire himself as a woman. With her help he put on the robe, and let his hair down till it flowed over his shoulders. Ototachibana then brought him her comb, which he put in his black tresses, and then adorned himself with strings of strange jewels, just as you see in the picture. When he had finished his unusual toilet, Ototachibana brought him her mirror. He smiled as he gazed at himself. The disguise was so perfect. He hardly knew himself, so changed was he. All traces of the warrior had disappeared, and in the shining surface only a beautiful lady looked back at him. Thus completely disguised, he set out for the enemy's camp alone. In the folds of his silk gown, next to his strong heart, was hidden a sharp dagger. The two chiefs, Kumaso and Takeru, were sitting in their tent, resting in the cool of the evening when the prince approached. They were talking of the news which had recently been carried to them, that the king's son had entered their country with a large army, determined to exterminate their band. They had both heard of the young warrior's renown, and for the first time in their wicked lives they felt afraid. In a pause in their talk, they happened to look up, and saw through the door of the tent a beautiful woman robed in sumptuous garments coming towards them. Like an apparition of loveliness she appeared in the soft twilight. Little did they dream that it was their enemy whose coming they so dreaded, who now stood before them in this disguise. "What a beautiful woman! Where has she come from?" said the astonished Kumaso, forgetting war and counsel and everything as he looked at the gentle intruder. He beckoned to the disguised prince and bade him sit down and serve them with wine. Yamato Take felt his heart swell with a fierce glee, for he now knew that his plan would succeed. However, he dissembled cleverly, and putting on a sweet air of shyness, he approached the rebel chief with slow steps and eyes glancing like a frightened deer. Charmed to distraction by the girl's loveliness, Kumaso drank cup after cup of wine for the pleasure of seeing her pour it out for him, till at last he was quite overcome with the quantity he had drunk. This was the moment for which the brave prince had been waiting. Flinging down the wine jar, he seized the tipsy and astonished Kumaso and quickly stabbed him to death with the dagger which he had secretly carried hidden in his breast. Takeru, the brigand's brother, was terror-struck as soon as he saw what was happening and tried to escape, but Prince Yamato was too quick for him. Ere he could reach the tent door, the prince was at his heel. His garments were clutched by a hand of iron, and a dagger flashed before his eyes, and he lay stabbed to the earth, dying but not yet dead. "Wait one moment," gasped the brigand painfully, and he seized the prince's hand. Yamato relaxed his hold somewhat and said, "Why should I pause, thou villain?" The brigand raised himself fearfully and said, "Tell me from whence you come, and whom I have the honor of addressing. Hitherto I believed that my dead brother and I were the strongest men in the land, and that there was no one who could overcome us. Alone you have ventured into our stronghold. Alone you have attacked and killed us. Surely you are more than mortal?" Then the young prince answered with a proud smile, "I am the son of the king, and my name is Yamato, and I have been sent by my father as the avenger of evil to bring death to all rebels. No longer shall robbery and murder hold my people in terror." And he held the dagger dripping red above the rebel's head. "Ah," gasped the dying man with a great effort, "I have often heard of you. You are indeed a strong man to have so easily overcome us. Allow me to give you a new name. From henceforth you shall be known as Yamato Take. Our title I bequeath to you as the bravest man in Yamato." And with these noble words, Takeru fell back and died. The prince, having thus successfully put an end to his father's enemies in the world, was prepared to return to the capital. On the way back he passed through the province of Idum. Here he met with another outlaw named Izumo Takeru, who he knew had done much harm in the land. He again resorted to stratagem, and feigned friendship with the rebel under an assumed name. Having done this, he made a sword of wood and jammed it tightly in the shaft of his own strong sword. This he purposely buckled to his side and wore on every occasion when he expected to meet the third robber, Takeru. He now invited Takeru to the bank of the river Hinokawa and persuaded him to try a swim with him in the cool, refreshing waters of the river. As it was a hot summer's day, the rebel was nothing loath to take a plunge in the river. While his enemy was still swimming down the stream, the prince turned back and landed with all possible haste. Unperceived, he managed to change swords, putting his wooden one in the place of the keen steel sword of Takeru. Knowing nothing of this, the brigand came up to the bank shortly. As soon as he had landed and donned his clothes, the prince came forward and asked him to cross swords with him to prove his skill, saying, "Let us prove which is the better swordsman of the two." The robber agreed with delight, feeling certain of victory, for he was famous as a fencer in his province, and he did not know who his adversary was. He seized quickly what he thought was his sword and stood on guard to defend himself. Alas for the rebel, the sword was the wooden one of the young prince, and in vain Takeru tried to unsheath it. It was jammed fast. Not all his exerted strength could move it. Even if his efforts had been successful, the sword would have been no use to him, for it was of wood. Yamato Take saw that his enemy was in his power, and swinging high the sword he had taken from Takeru, he brought it down with great might and dexterity, and cut off the robber's head. In this way, sometimes by using his wisdom, and sometimes by using his bodily strength, and at other times by resorting to craftiness, which was as much esteemed in those days as it is despised in these, he prevailed against all the king's foes one by one, and brought peace and rest to the land and the people. When he returned to the capital, the king praised him for his brave deeds, and held a feast in the palace in honor of his safe coming home, and presented him with many rare gifts. From this time forth, the king loved him more than ever, and would not let Yamato Take go from his side, for he said that his son was now as precious to him as one of his arms. But the prince was not allowed to live an idle life long. When he was about 30 years old, news was brought that the Ainu race, the aborigines of the islands of Japan, who had been conquered and pushed northwards by the Japanese, had rebelled in the eastern provinces, and leaving the vicinity which had been allotted to them, were causing great trouble in the land. The king decided that it was necessary to send an army to do battle with them, and bring them to reason. But who was to lead the men? Prince Yamato Take at once offered to go and bring the newly arisen rebels into subjection. Now as the king loved the prince dearly, and could not bear to have him go out of his sight even for the length of one day, he was, of course, very loath to send him on his dangerous expedition. But in the whole army there was no warrior so strong or so brave as the prince's son, so that his majesty, unable to do otherwise, reluctantly complied with Yamato's wish. When the time came for the prince to start, the king gave him a spear called the 8 arms length spear of the holly tree. The handle was probably made from the wood of the holly tree, and ordered him to set out to subjugate the eastern barbarians, as the Ainu were then called. The 8 arms length spear of the holly tree of those old days was prized by warriors just as much as the standard or banner is valued by a regiment in these modern days, when given by the king to his soldiers on the occasion of setting out for war. The prince respectfully and with great reverence received the king's spear, and, leaving the capital, marched with his army to the east. On his way, he visited first all of the temples of Ise for worship, and his aunt, the princess of Yamato and high priestess, came out to greet him. She it was who had given him her robe, which had proved such a boon to him before in helping him to overcome and slay the brigands of the West. He told her all that had happened to him, and of the great part her keepsake had played in the success of his previous undertaking, and thanked her very heartily. When she heard that he was starting out once again to do battle with his father's enemies, she went to the temple and reappeared bearing a sword and a beautiful bag which she had made herself, and which was full of flints, which in those times people used instead of matches for making fire. These she presented to him as a parting gift. The sword was the sword of Murakumo, one of those 3 sacred treasures which comprise the insignia of the Imperial House of Japan. No more auspicious talisman of luck and success could she have given her nephew, and she bade him use it in the hour of his greatest need. Yamato Take now bade farewell to his aunt, and once more placing himself at the head of his men, he marched to the farthest east through the province of Owari, and then he reached the province of Suruga. Here the governor welcomed the prince right heartily, and entertained him royally with many feasts. When these were over, the governor told his guests that his country was famous for its fine deer, and proposed a deer hunt for the prince's amusement. The prince was utterly deceived by the cordiality of his host, which was all feigned, and gladly consented to join the hunt. The governor then led the prince to a wild and extensive plain where the grass grew high and in great abundance. Quite ignorant that the governor had laid a trap for him with the desire to compass his death, the prince began to ride hard and hunt down the deer, when all of a sudden, to his amazement, he saw flames and smoke bursting out from the bush in front of him. Realizing his danger, he tried to retreat, but no sooner did he turn his horse in the opposite direction than he saw that even there the prairie was on fire. At the same time, the grass on his left and right burst into flames, and these began to spread swiftly towards him on all sides. He looked round for a chance of escape. There was none. He was surrounded by fire. "This deer hunt was then only a cunning trick of the enemy," said the prince, looking round on the flames and the smoke that crackled and rolled in towards him on every side.
What a fool I was to be lured into this trap like a wild beast!" And he ground his teeth with rage as he thought of the governor's smiling treachery. Dangerous as was his situation now, the prince was not in the least confounded. In his dire extremity, he remembered the gifts his aunt had given him when they parted, and it seemed to him as if she must, with prophetic foresight, have divined this hour of need. He coolly opened the flint bag that his aunt had given him and set fire to the grass near him. Then, drawing the sword of Murakumo from its sheath, he set to work to cut down the grass on either side of him with all speed. He determined to die if that were necessary, fighting for his life, and not standing still waiting for death to come to him. Strange to say, the wind began to change and to blow from the opposite direction, and the fiercest portion of the burning bush, which had hitherto threatened to come upon him, was now blown right away from him, and the prince, without even a scratch on his body, or even a single hair burned, lived to tell the tale of his wonderful escape, while the wind, rising to a gale, overtook the governor, and he was burned to death in the flames he had set alight to kill Yamato Take. Now the prince ascribed his escape entirely to the virtue of the sword of Murakumo, and to the protection of Amaterasu, the sun goddess of Ise, who controls the wind and all the elements and ensures the safety of all who pray to her in the hour of danger. Lifting the precious sword, he raised it above his head many times in token of his great respect, and as he did this, he renamed it Kusanagi no Tsurugi, or the grass-cleaving sword, and the place where he set fire to the grass round him and escaped from death in the burning prairie, he called Yaidzu. To this day there is a spot along the great Tokaido Railway named Yaidzu, which is said to be the very place where this thrilling event took place. Thus did the brave Prince Yamato Take escape out of the snare laid for him by his enemy. He was full of resource and courage, and finally outwitted and subdued all his foes. Leaving Yaidzu, he marched eastward, and came to the shore at Idzu, from whence he wished to cross to Kadzusa. In these dangers and adventures he had been followed by his faithful, loving wife, the Princess Ototachibana. For his sake she counted the weariness of the long journeys and the dangers of war as nothing, and her love for her warrior husband was so great that she felt well repaid for all her wanderings, if she could but hand him his sword when he sallied forth to battle, or minister to his wants when he returned weary to the camp. But the heart of the prince was full of war and conquest, and he cared little for the faithful Ototachibana. From long exposure and traveling, and from care and grief at her lord's coldness to her, her beauty had faded, and her ivory skin was burnt brown by the sun, and the prince told her one day that her place was in the palace behind the screens at home, and not with him upon the warpath. But in spite of rebuffs and indifference on her husband's part, Ototachibana could not find it in her heart to leave him. But perhaps it would have been better for her if she had done so, for on the way to Idzu, when they came to Owari, her heart was well nigh broken. Here dwelt in a palace shaded by pine trees and approached by imposing gates, the Princess Miyadzu, beautiful as the cherry blossom in the blushing dawn of a spring morning. Her garments were dainty and bright, and her skin was white as snow, for she had never known what it was to be weary along the path of duty, or to walk in the heat of a summer's sun. And the prince was ashamed of his sunburnt wife in her travel-stained garments, and bade her remain behind while he went to visit the Princess Miyadzu. Day after day he spent hours in the gardens and the palace of his new friend, thinking only of his pleasure and caring little for his poor wife, who remained behind to weep in the tent at the misery which had come into her life. Yet she was so faithful a wife, and her character so patient, that she never allowed a reproach to escape her lips, or a frown to mar the sweet sadness of her face, and she was ever ready with a smile to welcome her husband back, or usher him forth wherever he went. At last the day came when the Prince Yamato Take must depart for Idzu and cross over the sea to Kadzusa.
and he bade his wife follow in his retinue as an attendant, while he went to take a ceremonious farewell of the Princess Miyatsu. She came out to greet him dressed in gorgeous robes, and she seemed more beautiful than ever, and when Yamato Take saw her, he forgot his wife, his duty, and everything except the joy of the idle present, and swore that he would return to Owari and marry her when the war was over. And as he looked up when he had said these words, he met the large almond eyes of Ototachibana fixed full upon him, in unspeakable sadness and wonder, and he knew that he had done wrong, but he hardened his heart and rode on, caring little for the pain he had caused her. When they reached the seashore at Idzu, his men sought for boats in which to cross the straits to Kazusa, but it was difficult to find boats enough to allow all the soldiers to embark. Then the prince stood on the beach, and in the pride of his strength he scoffed and said, "This is not the sea, this is only a brook. Why do you men want so many boats? I could jump this if I want." When at last they had all embarked and were fairly on their way across the straits, the sky suddenly clouded and a great storm arose. The waves rose mountains high, the wind howled, and the lightning flashed, and the thunder rolled, and the boat which held Ototachibana and the prince and his men were tossed from crest to crest of the rolling waves, till it seemed that every moment must be their last, and they must all be swallowed up in the angry sea. For Rin-jin, the Dragon King of the Sea, had heard Yamato Take jeer, and had raised this terrible storm in anger to show the scoffing prince how awful the sea could be, though it did but look like a brook. The terrified crew lowered the sails and looked after the rudder, and worked for their dear lives' sake, but all in vain. The storm only seemed to increase in violence, and all gave themselves up for lost. Then the faithful Ototachibana rose, and forgetting all the grief that her husband had caused her, forgetting even that he had wearied of her in the one great desire of her love to save him, she determined to sacrifice her life to rescue him from death if it were possible. While the waves dashed over the ship and the wind whirled round them in a fury, she stood up and said, "Surely all this has come because the prince has angered Rin-jin, the god of the sea, by his jesting. If so, I, Ototachibana, will appease the wrath of the sea god who desires nothing less than my husband's life." Then, addressing the sea, she said, "I will take the place of his augustness, Yamato Take. I will now cast myself into your outraged depths, giving my life for his. Therefore, hear me and bring him safely to the shore of Kazusa." With these words, she leaped quickly into the boisterous sea, and the waves soon whirled her away, and she was lost to sight. Strange to say, the storm ceased at once, and the sea became as calm and smooth as the matting on which the astonished onlookers were sitting. The gods of the sea were now appeased, and the weather cleared, and the sun shone as on a summer's day. Yamato Take soon reached the opposite shore and landed safely, even as his wife Ototachibana had prayed. His prowess in war was marvelous, and he succeeded after some time in conquering the eastern barbarians, the Ainu. He ascribed his safe landing wholly to the faithfulness of his wife, who had so willingly and lovingly sacrificed herself in the hour of his utmost peril. His heart was softened at the remembrance of her, and he never allowed her to pass from his thoughts even for a moment. Too late he had learned to esteem the goodness of her heart and the greatness of her love for him. As he was returning on his homeward way, he came to the high pass of the Usui Toge, and here he stood and gazed at the wonderful prospect beneath him. The country from this great elevation all lay open to his sight, a vast panorama of mountain and plain and forest, with rivers winding like silver ribbons through the land. Then far off he saw the distant sea, which shimmered like a luminous mist in the great distance, where Ototachibana had given her life for him. And as he turned towards it, he stretched out his arms, thinking of her love, which he had scorned, and his faithlessness to her.
His heart burst out into a sorrowful and bitter cry. "Azuma! Azuma! Ya! Oh, my wife, my wife!" And to this day there is a district in Tokyo called Azuma, which commemorates the words of Prince Yamato Take, and the place where his faithful wife leapt into the sea to save him is still pointed out. So, though in life the Princess Ototachibana was unhappy, history keeps her memory green, and the story of her unselfishness and heroic death will never pass away. Yamato Take had now fulfilled all his father's orders. He had subdued all rebels, and rid the land of all robbers and enemies to the peace, and his renown was great, for in the whole land there was no one who could stand up against him. He was so strong in battle and wise in counsel. He was about to return straight for home by the way he had come, when the thought struck him that he would find it more interesting to take another route. So he passed through the province of Owari and came to the province of Omi. When the prince reached Omi, he found the people in a state of great excitement and fear. In many houses as he passed along, he saw the signs of mourning and heard loud lamentations. On inquiring the cause of this, he was told that a terrible monster had appeared in the mountains, who daily came down from thence and made raids on the villages, devouring whoever he could seize. Many homes had been made desolate, and the men were afraid to go out to their daily work in the fields, or the women to go to the rivers to wash their rice. When Yamato Take heard this, his wrath was kindled, and he said fiercely, "From the western end of Kyushu to the eastern corner of Yezo, I have subdued all the king's enemies. There is no one who dares to break the laws or to rebel against the king. It is indeed a matter for wonder that here in this place so near the capital, a wicked monster has dared to take up his abode and be the terror of the king's subjects. Not long shall it find pleasure in devouring innocent folk. I will start out and kill it at once." With these words he set out for the Ibuki mountain, where the monster was said to live. He climbed up a good distance, when all of a sudden, at a winding in the path, a monster serpent appeared before him and stopped the way. "This must be the monster," said the prince. "I do not need my sword for a serpent. I can kill him with my hands." He thereupon sprang upon the serpent and tried to strangle it to death with his bare arms. It was not long before his prodigious strength gained the mastery, and the serpent lay dead at his feet. Now a sudden darkness came over the mountain, and rain began to fall, so that for the gloom and the rain the prince could hardly see which way to take. In a short time, however, while he was groping his way down the pass, the weather cleared, and our brave hero was able to make his way quickly down the mountain. When he got back, he began to feel ill, and to have burning pains in his feet, so he knew that the serpent had poisoned him. So great was his suffering that he could hardly move, much less walk, so he had himself carried to a place in the mountains famous for its hot mineral springs, which rose bubbling out of the earth, and almost boiling from the volcanic fires beneath. Yamato Take bathed daily in these waters, and gradually he felt his strength come again, and the pains left him, till at last one day he found with great joy that he was quite recovered. He now hastened to the temples of Ise, where you will remember that he prayed before undertaking this long expedition. His aunt, priestess of the shrine, who had blessed him on his setting out, now came to welcome him back. He told her of the many dangers he had encountered, and of how marvelously his life had been preserved through all, and she praised his courage and his warrior's prowess. And then, putting on her most magnificent robes, she returned thanks to their ancestress, the sun goddess Amaterasu, to whose protection they both ascribed the prince's wonderful preservation. Here ends the story of Princess Yamato Take of Japan. End of chapter 18. The story of Prince Yamato Take.